Hey guys, welcome to Boxing Squared for boxing news and views from around the internet. In this video, covering two different cards. The first one, Daniel Dubois and Trevor Bryan, and then towards the back end of the video, the ShowBox card that Bakhodir Jalolov, the Olympic gold medalist, is returning on. There's actually 3 heavyweight fights on that card, and that card has changed significantly since it was announced, but details a little bit later on. But first, Trevor Bryan, Daniel Dubois. Dubois is challenging for the WBA regular title, or world title as they call it these days, that Bryan holds. And Bryan got it through fighting for the vacant title a year ago. Previously, he'd been the interim champion. We won't go through all the backstory, how it all came to be, but effectively, he's had a relatively safe path to where he is right now. And in Daniel Dubois, you've got a guy who's coming back from a loss against Joe Joyce the best part of 2 years ago. And this fight is going to tell us a lot about Daniel Dubois. Because one of the questions I have is, has Daniel Dubois learned his lesson? And what I mean by that is, we saw against Joe Joyce, who had the height and reach advantage, not huge, but he did have those advantages and he made them count, all behind the back of a jab. So it was a very simple game plan with his trainer Ismail Salas. Use his skills. He was jabbing, encircling, and controlling Daniel Dubois, basically neutralizing Dubois to a large extent, and obviously busted up Daniel Dubois' face, and Dubois eventually took a knee, and Joyce got the win. And Dubois, since then, he's been working his way back. He's changed trainers from Martin Bowers now with Shane McGuigan, and he's had a couple of tune-ups. We've had the likes of Bogdan Dinu, we've also had Joe Kusumanu, but those guys are what, top 50 to top 100, somewhere there or thereabouts. They're not the sort of guys that are going to really test you and tell you much about how you're progressing. You might get something from them, obviously some confidence after the loss to Joyce, but he's actually facing a guy in Trevor Bryan who's got a slight reach advantage by an inch. They're roughly the same height, so I'm expecting Trevor Bryan to employ a similar game plan to Joe Joyce, because the template is there. And I know a lot of people don't rate Trevor Bryan from what they've seen. They saw him against Jonathan Goudry. They saw him against Berman Stavern. Both times he was out of shape. He was in the high 260s. But I don't think this is going to be the case for this fight. I think people have to realize, even though Trevor Bryan's resume is certainly a little bit on the light side, and Don King has really maneuvered him into this position with no real super tough fights on the way up, and certainly the inactivity hasn't helped his cause as well. He's probably one of the least known sort of heavyweights that's holding one of these sort of secondary titles. But in terms of his actual skill set, the guy can box. And the jab is especially a decent weapon for Trevor Bryan. And I don't think people have really been sort of paying much attention to Bryan and what he's been doing, his camp, all that sort of stuff, because people think that Dubois is going to go in there and wipe the floor. But that's what some people thought about the fight with Joe Joyce, that Dubois was going to go in, just blitz him with his power. But what we saw in that fight was Dubois bereft of ideas against a guy who was moving and jabbing and wasn't allowing him to sort of set his feet, get his big power punches away, and Dubois went away from the body in that fight as well. He's a decent body puncher, just didn't really sort of throw too much shots to the body. He looked out of ideas in that one. Trevor Bryan does have a good jab, and in this camp, and here's a sort of shot running here in the background of the video, he's been working with Larry Holmes. Obviously, Holmes, a respected heavyweight champion, the Eastern Assassin, had one of the best jabs in the game. Trevor Bryan's jab was already decent, and so to me, from what I've seen from the outside looking in of Trevor Bryan, he's giving it everything. And here's another clip of him training. He looks like he's not that sort of fleshy, flabby, sort of high 260s weight that he's sort of plotted in with in his past couple of fights. And if Trevor Bryan is coming in somewhere more appropriate, for his frame and to help him implement the game plan that he probably does need to sort of go with, somewhere around 250 is going to be much better. Maybe it'll be somewhere around 255. As I've said for, when Trevor Bryan steps up into bigger fights, he can't be as fleshy and out of shape as he has seemed to have been. That hasn't helped him in other fights where he's just looked a little bit lackluster, hasn't been able to sort of put his foot down on certain points where he could have. I mean, Jonathan Gudry was able to hang with him for the most part, and that was much closer than people thought it would be. But I do think that Daniel Dubois, this is an acid test for him, because certainly if he struggles to any real degree, or if he even loses, people are just going to probably write him off. I mean, it's worth remembering Dubois is still just 24 years old, still learning, still developing, the best years probably still to come. But this is a real pivotal moment in his career. Bryan is not a top 10 or a top 20 fighter. Let's get that clear. Dubois, certainly from the eye test, from what we've seen before, he looks like he has the goods to go a long way in the heavyweight division. But he needs to show us his development, show us that he can now deal with the jab, that he's got some tools to respond, and to start to break down and maybe even stop, but at least outpoint a guy in Trevor Bryan. So I think this is going to be a lot tougher than a lot of people actually realize. But I do think this is a good litmus test, and I think it's good matchmaking for where Dubois is currently at. And if he can't pass the test, well, certainly major question marks will be hanging around Daniel Dubois. But it's not to say with a few more years development, if he loses, that he can't come back and have a successful run in the heavyweight division. Certainly there has been an element that he's been pushed quite quickly by Frank Warren, and he came a cropper against Joe Joyce. The matchmaking's been relatively sort of soft since the loss, the two fights, overmatched opponents. Trevor Bryan's got more about him, and he could make this interesting. And remembering, he is the guy that Daniel Dubois is challenging. Bryan is the belt holder, as it were. So he's not going to just give it away. This is the sort of time for Trevor Bryan where he's thinking, I'm going to make my legacy. I'm the guy that should be talked about. I want to make a statement and put on a show to prove to people that I'm actually legit, because those question marks hang around Bryan because of the inactivity, the soft matchmaking, all that sort of stuff, all the shenanigans that happen under Don King. But this is also for him a pivotal fight in his career. So I don't mind the fight at all, and I think it's good matchmaking for Dubois at this stage of his career. And I'm not going to be surprised if it is much tougher, especially if Bryan is behind the jab, moving and making it awkward for Daniel Dubois, circling, doing similar things to what Joe Joyce was. We have to see if he can actually implement it. But I'm looking forward to this, and actually it was seemingly a lot cheaper where I am via Fight TV. It was only $10 for the card, so I'm looking forward to that. And just turning to the heavyweight fight on the undercard, Dakari Scott, Jonathan Gudry. I quite like this as well. I think this is good matchmaking. Gudry came better than advertised against Bryan last time out, and he showed that he's tough, he's durable, he'll bring it. And in his opponent, Dakari Scott, 7-0 heavyweight prospect, 23 years old, 5'10", quite heavy set. You can see here, this is recently having some sparring with Jarrell Miller. I think this is a good test for him at this stage of his career. I wasn't necessarily hugely impressed with his last outing against Ahmed Hefny, which was on the undercard of Bryan's last card. But I do think that there's some talent there, and obviously he's developing. The last fight was a big step up, and seemingly this might be another small step up again. So he's going to have to really be dedicated to the body work and trying to break Jonathan Gudry down to actually sort of soften him up to potentially either get him out of there or at least rack up enough points to beat him, because Gudry, we saw in that fight with Bryan, will keep coming. So I don't mind the card. $10 for me, which ended up being, $16 after the conversion. I'm looking forward to the card. I know some people will think I'm a maniac for that, but there's not much in the heavyweight division to look forward to at the moment, so just let me have it. In the other card, this is actually on Friday night in the United States, Bakhodir Jalolov, he returns. The Olympic champion will be facing big Jack Mulowayi, and that's going to be on a ShowBox card. So 3 heavyweight fights on that slate. You've got Jalolov versus Mulowayi. Also, George Arias versus Alante Green. That's actually a different fight. Originally, it was meant to be Elvis Garcia versus Alante Green. So Arias steps in. Joe Jones also now facing Amron Sands. So there had been another fight which was on the card with the Icelandic heavyweight Gunnar Kolbeinn Christensen. His opponent, Igor Plavaco, pulled out for whatever reason. A couple of Ludabella heavyweights, and Arias and Sands now stepping in. And I guess we'll just start quickly on those other fights. So George Arias coming off the best win of his career against Cassius Chaney. He's going to get the win here against Alante Green. had a look at his record, haven't seen him fight before. It's really nothing there. George Arias should have too much for him. Joe Joyce, he'll be facing Amron Sands, and this is a bit of a heat check for Sands after he was just absolutely pummeled to a first-round knockout against Christian Thun. This will really sort of tell us if Sands is really up to much, because Joe Joyce, really, he's top 100 guy. Sands should be going out there and beating him if he's got anything about him. So this is one of those sort of, okay, well, if he loses this, where's he really going type fights? He might end up devolving into some sort of journeyman. But Jalolov and Jack Mulowayi, I quite like that fight. This is a step up from Kamil Sokolowski. I know there are people, because they see Sokolowski facing prospects, they put him up on a bit of a pedestal when he gets some halfway decent performances or some wins, but Mulowayi would beat Sokolowski in my view. This is a slight step up from Sokolowski. I actually am quite interested to see how Jalolov handles this, because Mulowayi is tough, he's durable. Last year, coming off the biggest win of his career against Abdi Dovtayev, he's gone 10 rounds with Frank Sanchez before. So he's not a knockover. He's not a huge puncher either, but he is a guy that does have some skills, some grit, and I do expect he's going to make it a little bit awkward for Jalolov, but behind the back of the height and the reach, Jalolov should control the action, I think, for the most part, and he should be able to get the win here. Maybe not a stoppage, but we'll see if he can detonate that big left hand. But I like that fight and the matchmaking, and actually it's not a bad card overall in terms of the heavyweights. Drop a comment, loud and often. Hit like, hit subscribe, follow me on Twitter, boxing_squared. I'm out.